is Brandon Tanti, our newly crowned three-time champion of the F1OWC, who clinched the title yesterday in an epic 21st and final round in the Season 11 Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. Tonight we'll be looking back at all the action from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the highs and lows of Season 11, the final championship points tally, discuss all the driver transfers from last night's driver draft, and look and discuss the final regulations for Season 12. We'll also be announcing the F1OWC Season 11 Driver of the Year as voted by you guys. Brandon, welcome, congratulations. Tell us how you feel about being crowned the world champion of the F1OWC for the third time, despite having a rather troublesome round in Abu Dhabi.
Well, thank you for the lovely introduction there. Welcome to everyone as well, those who have tuned in previously, as well as any new listeners we've got in tonight. It's been quite a bit of a roller coaster the last round, but happy to come out on top. It was quite probably my lowest scoring round for a while, I'd say.
I think the gap was about 8 or 9 points that you'd taken from those two races, which was the worst combined points total that you've done in the entire year.
That's right. It's been it was a difficult feature race, that's for sure. Quite a few bit of ups and downs. A small mistake on my behalf, which kind of cost me in the end. But the ultimate, I think, retirement was an interesting one, that's for sure. But happy to be sitting here and being crowned world champion again once more.
So how does winning the Season 11 championship compare to some of your championship victories in the past?
In terms of that, I think this championship win by far has been the most exciting and the most, rewarding, I'd say. It's compared to my previous championships, I don't think has been as contested as this one. So it's definitely felt really good to come out on top and win it.
And the fact that it did come down to ultimately 1 point on the 42nd and final day at the end of Abu Dhabi on Thursday yesterday, do you feel that the pressure was starting to build over the last couple of rounds, despite the fact that you had what seemed to be a rather healthy points advantage to secure that championship, that Ryan had done just enough to take it to the final race? Do you think that the poor results in Abu Dhabi were a result of that pressure being applied to you, or was it something completely separate?
I think it was a bit of misfortune involved. I don't think the pressure, I felt it as much. There was a part of me that really knew that I had to work hard in the sprint race. And fortunately enough for me, I managed to pick up the fastest lap and an extra point, which in a way kind of helped me sit a bit more comfortable for the feature race. In terms of the feature race itself, though, I think a lot of things happened in that race that didn't kind of go my way, and ultimately resulted in a DNF. So, not ideal. Obviously, something that I'll have to look, to change in terms of going back to that track in the future. But
we were informed by a lot of the drivers that a lot of additional practice was put in from all of the teams up the paddock, that they were really trying to extract the best results that they could out of the final race or final round of the season. Ultimately, in qualifying, you'd been out-qualified by your championship rival, Ryan Lowe. How much of an impact did that have in qualifying and going into that feature race on you starting behind him, knowing that ultimately you'd want to finish ahead and wrap it up as quick as you could?
I'd say it puts a little bit more of added pressure. It was a little bit frustrating, I guess, in qualifying to have the end result of being behind Ryan. But at the end of the day, races where the points matter. So, it was about managing my race in a way that I could, achieve the best out of it. Probably didn't get the ultimate best, but it was, it was trying to fight as hard as I could to get what I could at the time. It was a bit of a last lap battle with yourself
Yeah, that's right.
and Ryan as well, which was quite spicy, but it was exciting as well. So, yeah.
So we're just going to have a look back at some of the other key points from the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. As we know, we mentioned in the podcast on Tuesday that Brian Cruz had announced he was retiring and stepping away from the F1OWC at the end of this season. He was lucky enough to clinch the pole position in qualifying on Wednesday by 0.2 of a second ahead of Shannon Mortlock, which was really unexpected because he was down the order with, seconds left, and then all of a sudden he just banged out this lap and got to start the last race of, potentially his career at the front. How do you see that in terms of, saying farewell to a driver of his caliber, champion alike? Do you think that it was a fitting way to send him off?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think that it's something that he'll remember, especially grabbing the pole in the fashion that he did, still showing that he still has the pace. Um, he's never shown otherwise. In many circumstances, he's been pretty much at the front pack for the race he has attended. But in terms of the last race and it being his final race, in terms of him not coming back next season, I'm sure he'll be proud in the way that he has done it. He still shows everyone that he has the pace. So
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
I think another key sort of achievement or story to take out of Abu Dhabi was Shannon Mortlock starting on the front row for his last time for Red Bull Racing. He made the sort of decision to look at racing with no ABS a couple of rounds ago, and he's been putting that into place. He's finally taken top step of the podium in the sprint race on Wednesday. Obviously, matching now 5 race wins with Brian Cruz and Oscar Grant that we mentioned in the podcast prior. How do you think Shannon Mortlock's driver development is going to improve or plateau out, given that he's taken this maiden win on the setting choice?
In terms of running no ABS, it's definitely a hard decision to make, especially it's difficult to learn, especially if you've never done it before. But I think he's definitely showed that the practice he's put in has paid off, particularly in that race, in terms of consistency over a whole race. He I think put himself in the best position strategically, specifically when was it the virtual safety car?
Yes.
It was a virtual safety car that came out in the early onset of the race, and he took advantage of it and boxed. He got some tyres that he may have had to go a bit longer on towards the end of the race, but he did put himself in the best position to win, and obviously his consistency, running no ABS is starting to build and gain better traction. So
yeah, I found also myself, racing alongside him throughout the 2 races in Abu Dhabi, that you can run by yourself with no ABS pretty consistently, but running wheel to wheel off the grippier part of the track offline is always a challenging element of doing that. I think Shannon's been able to grow his racecraft with no ABS, and it was shown throughout the Abu Dhabi race, and I think it's really fantastic for him to walk away with that race win in the sprint race. I think another headline to also take is Harry Ryan, who debuted in the American Grand Prix a couple of rounds ago. He managed to take P2 for Racing Point, securing their second podium of the campaign in Season 11. What do you make of Harry's integration with the drivers on the grid, and obviously him getting the podium place in Abu Dhabi?
No, I think he's done very well for the short period of time that he's spent in the very short races he's had with us. So I'm sure he's proud of the podium that he did attain, and he's pretty much shown everyone else that sort of pace that he can show on his day. Um, you know, Speaking to him, or some words were saying that, or floating around, that he didn't particularly like this track, but despite those challenges, he's still come out, and pulled a good result. So it'd be, I'm looking forward to seeing how he progresses, especially from the start of season 12.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think it'd be interesting to see him progress through the season, obviously going into season 12 with a new driver lineup, which we will mention later on in this podcast. I think it'd be really good to see how he builds over the course of the season and how he's going to take that battle and really strengthen that midfield of the grid. Um, Looking down the results, I think Oscar Grant had a rather sour finish to the season 11 campaign, who's in line to potentially be one of the guys to take out driver of the year in F1OWC for season 11. So I think, what do you take on Oscar Grant's incidents throughout the sprint races throughout the over the course of the weekend?
no, I think it was definitely unlike him, to have a sort of race pan out in the way that it did for him. Especially if you look back at his previous few rounds that he's competed in.
It was kind of
It
building and
was
building and building.
Yeah, I think it started from a qualifying incident where he received a 5 place grid penalty for colliding with my car
Mm.
due to myself retiring in qualifying, and he happened to come across my car, which was kind of spread across the track, and it caused him to receive a 5 place grid penalty for the sprint. So I'm guessing that was a bit frustrating, and that frustration may have led into the race itself.
Mm.
And obviously, when you are frustrated, you're more prone to making mistakes, or trying to push the limit a bit too far, trying to gain back what you may have lost, or what you may feel you have lost. But I'm sure he'll pick himself up, very quickly, and move beyond that. I'm sure he's already looking forward to next season and putting this behind him.
Yeah, naturally. So he had, in the sprint race, he had a collision with Kurt Dunn in the Ferrari, your teammate, in the first sector. He'd picked up penalty for that, and then later on in the race, collided with his teammate Mitchell Hayward, and then ultimately ended up crashing out of the race due to no fault of his own. Do you think that Oscar Grant can build on this at his new team for season 12 and come back stronger and potentially challenge for that championship?
Oh, I still believe so. I still have confidence that he can challenge for sure. Um, like I said, and I think in most people's case, sometimes drivers have a bad round or have a bad race in itself, and it makes you sort of feel a bit deflated. But you've got to kind of put those things behind you and move forward. It being the last race of the season, I think he'll be quick to put it behind him, especially when the new season is up and coming so quickly.
Yeah.
And he's proven that he has solid pace, and that he can compete at the top level. He has fantastic racecraft. So yeah, I
I
have
think
confidence that he'll definitely be there.
Yeah, I think we're in a good position, as you touched on. The next season is coming up rather quick. Next week, in fact, where traditionally we've had 2-3 months break between seasons while we wait for the new game to come out. We've got the luxury of using F1 2019 again, so we have the advantage of already running a season under our belts. Having said that, in Abu Dhabi, Kurt Dunn, your teammate, has finished ahead of you in both of those races. Obviously, you'd retired from the feature race. You've retained Kurt as a teammate for season 12. Given that he
Yeah.
has finished ahead of you in both of these last races of season 11, how much of a threat is he to you in retaining your championship challenge for season 12?
In terms of Kurt, I value him highly as a very good driver, a very solid driver. I think the one thing that lets him down in a way is consistency, and I think that's something he may have worked on over the past few rounds, which have seen him gain a lot better results compared to, say, the start of the season. But yeah, I wouldn't rule him out as a contender. He's definitely built himself up, and he's continually building on the performances that he's having, and I think some new equipment may have helped in that process. But
because he's invested in a Fanatec wheel, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. So
it's definitely a big investment in his own ability to go racing, and hopefully it means that he is invested in F1OWC for the long haul.
Oh, for sure. I think making that sort of investment is not something you do lightly, especially if you're thinking about whether or not you're going to continue. But I think he's fully invested in it now, and especially I think having a full season with myself has kind of helped him understand a few different things he may have not understood prior to that. So
well, I think it showed in the sprint race, after being taken out by Oscar Grant in the first sector of the first lap of the race, he was able to build himself back up. He pitted, he got helped by a safety car and stuff like that, but he ended up finishing the race in third place. Ultimately, he lost it on penalties, as some of those were overturned. He ended up finishing fourth. But to come back from, obviously broken wing and disaster on the first lap, come back, finish third provisionally, is a good recovery. And I think it's something we may not have seen, say, Kurt prior to Monza.
Yeah, like I said, he's definitely had a lot better end to the season that he started it. So, he's building himself to be a lot better as a driver, and I think he's showing a better or a higher level of resilience, maybe to some of the incidents that he has been caught up in, especially more recently than maybe some of the ones he's been caught up with prior to that. Not letting maybe the frustration get to him as much, and just focusing on the race and trying to get a result out of it, and not thinking about the incident that may have happened in itself. So,
yeah, that's right. But looking at the Abu Dhabi feature race, as we mentioned before, Ryan Lowe went on to win the race and get the fastest lap. With your retirement meant that he had closed in enough points but lost the championship by one single point. From his perspective, how would you react to that scenario if you were to be in his shoes, losing a 10-month long championship by 1 point?
If I was in his position, I think it would definitely be frustrating. 1 point is hard to swallow. It's definitely hard to swallow, especially if you start going to think back to races where you've made silly mistakes or some small errors that may have cost you 1 or 2 positions that could have made the difference. But at the same time, especially if you want to mount a challenge for the next season, you just really have to focus on accepting it for what it is and just moving forward and focusing on the next season. He'll definitely be there next season, I have no doubt. He's definitely picked up his pace, and practice may have a part to play in that, but he's done really well. I think he's outscored me over the past 3 rounds, so if that doesn't show anything, I don't know what else will, really.
Yeah, and also in the feature race, Toro Rosso picking up their best combined finish of the entire season, with 50 points in the bank for the Constructors' Championship, with Mitchell Collin finishing 6th for Toro Rosso, and myself, Dylan Anderson, finishing on the podium. I think it was a really good end to the season for Toro Rosso. Obviously, driver change in the middle after the team had experienced a sort of level of dominance and race wins and etc. with Luke Smith. Obviously, Red Bull made that decision mid-year to swap or transfer me and Luke over. So for Toro Rosso to lose that, that front running sort of mojo within the garage, I think it was really good to end the season off with a podium for them. What's your take on Toro Rosso this year?
I think it's been an interesting season. I think for the drivers that have taken or been within the team, especially on Luke's behalf, going from Toro Rosso then moving to Red Bull, and then yourself kind of going from Red Bull going back to Toro Rosso. But interesting dynamics in play. I think in a way it's hard to accept when you have to move from one team to another, but at the same time, you have shown that, especially in the feature race, that you can score some big points, and I'm sure you were happy about getting a podium, being podium-less, throughout the whole season.
That's right. It's I had the luxury of ending my 63 Grand Prix race drought since my last podium, which come with McLaren. So it's definitely a big milestone for myself within the F1OWC, picking up my 110th podium finish. A podium that had eluded me for quite some time, so it's good to get the monkey off the back, and hopefully, with two pretty solid races in Abu Dhabi, I'm hoping that form can, return and be a bit more consistent in season 12. I know me personally, there's a few races that slipped through, or podium opportunities that slipped through my fingers in season 11, so it'd be good to return back to those tracks and see what we can do in season
Well, you did
12.
have an opportunity the race prior to the final race, on the sprint race at Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, it was really frustrating there. Obviously, going back to a Thrustmaster wheel after a brief time on the controller took a little bit to get used to again, but then to find yourself, I was in 4th place. I knew that your teammate Kurt Dunn had some penalties. At this stage, I didn't have any penalties, and we started the last lap of the race, and I thought, okay, we'll charge up the batteries, and then Ryan Lowe and yourself, obviously contesting a championship battle, come up behind me, and going into the final sector of the race, Ryan's made the move. He made it stick. I was able to hold off yourself. At this point, I didn't know how much it was going to affect the championship itself. But obviously, crossing the line, then being reassured that Kurt had that penalty, only to lose out in Ryan, passing me in the last sector of the race and losing that podium opportunity again. It was not enjoyable, to say the least.
But it was frustrating in itself. Or...
Yeah, frustrating is an understatement. But to bounce back in the feature race and sort of go one better, get the P2, because obviously Oscar had that 10-second penalty for his efforts in the sprint race to finish P2. Bank 36 points, because obviously it's a double points race. It was really, really good. For me to finish off the season 11 campaign in that fashion.
That's fantastic. It was really good to see on your behalf to score a podium. I was quite happy for you, so it's good to see.
So we're going to go through the championship points, which have been finalised after the season 11 championship. Obviously, you got yourself, Brandon Tanti, in first place, 3-time world champion, on 958 points. Runner-up, Ryan Lowe, on 957 points. And then we got Luke Smith, 699 points. Oscar Grant in the Alfa Romeo, 688 points. Shannon Mortlock in the Red Bull, 681 points. Brian Cruz, 2-time world champion in the Renault, 593 points. Kurt Dunn in the Ferrari, 553 points. Austin Smedley in the Haas, 326 points. Myself, Dylan Anderson, 263 points for Toro Rosso. Mitchell Collin, Season 3 world champion, William Torosso, and 125 points. Arthur Chisanga retired early on in the season. He did have the opportunity to get a podium, which was good for him and Racing Point. He finishes 11th in the Season 11 Championship on 110 points. Fletcher Sermon for Mercedes. He did really well on 92 points. He managed to close the gap to his teammate Steve Shadlow and pass him in the feature race in Abu Dhabi. Steve Shadlow, 13th in the championship at 88 points. Trent Fuller for McLaren, 60 points. Then Harry Ryan in P15 for Racing Point, 48 points for his 3-round effort. Then Wayne Hames in the Renault, P16, 45 points. Mitchell Hayward in the Alfa Romeo on 40 points. Ben Matchett, new guy, gets points in the Abu Dhabi feature race, puts him in P18 ahead of Eric Duck in the Haas, who finishes 19th on 8 points. So last night we held basically a draft of what teams we were going to go into for season 12. Now this is based on championship order, which opened up good opportunities for people that finish higher in the championship to pick the car that they desired. But also, if people wanted to be teammates with certain personnel, it created a lot of questions if those teammates, or optional teammates finished further down the championship. Now that obviously happened with yourself. Obviously, you signed with Renault, which for the most part was unexpected in the paddock. Do you want to touch on briefly your decision to go to Renault and walk away from Ferrari, who have brought you to 2 championships?
I think this decision was made it was a little bit later than what I expected. It was, with a few rounds to go, thinking, got me starting to think about, the car selection and what I might want to do. In the middle of the season, I thought to myself that maybe I might stay at Ferrari. It was a really tough decision to leave Ferrari, particularly bringing me a lot of success over the past 2 seasons in particular. But ultimately, I think what made my decision sort of final was the fact that I wanted to try something different, be in a different car, sort of a new challenge. Take on something different. So, I'm excited I'm excited in my choice. I'm happy with my choice, and I'm happy that, Kurt has decided to, continue, the partnership that we've made this season, and sit alongside me as my teammate as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's really good that you guys have chosen to, remain together, going off to Renault, and like I touched on before, it was very sort of fortunate that you guys were able to retain that partnership, as there were a handful of drivers between yourself and Kurt on the draft. Kurt was 7th pick, and ultimately everyone else had picked their cars. But, I think going off to Renault, like I did it, going to Haas in season 7, obviously that season didn't pan out too favourably for me. Would you have remained at Ferrari if you didn't win the championship?
I think it was more so the opposite, in my opinion. My initial thought, going into this season was if I, happened to come out on top as, getting another championship, maybe I would stay on at Ferrari, and continue that sort of success. But as the season went on, it was sort of more of a situation of, thinking about maybe trying something different and keeping it fresh and sort of exciting. So, that was a big, factor in the decision that I made, and still happy, that, even though, I love Ferrari and everything that it entails, because it has such a proud history in the F1OWC, that
Yeah,
to
that's right.
drive for them. It brings a sense of pride.
Yeah,
But at the same time, thinking about what I wanted, and what was something that I could keep, exciting was, to try on something different.
a new
So
chapter.
yeah,
So moving on to McLaren, obviously the season 11 runner-up Ryan Lowe elected to remain at McLaren. How he'll be lining up alongside Oscar Grant, who's moved from Alfa Romeo. Now, how do you view that partnership in terms of Ryan's choice to remain at McLaren, and obviously Oscar Grant joining him to contest the constructor battle with yourself at Renault?
I believe it's a very smart decision in the partnership that they have formed together.
Yep.
They're both, very solid drivers on their day. Both proven race winners.
Mm.
Both can show that they can get both can get top points when the time calls for it. So I think in essence it'll be a very hard partnership to break over the course of the season, and to keep up with. It'll take a big effort from all the other teams, including Renault as well.
Yeah.
Myself and Kurt to maintain consistent results, to keep competitive with the likes of Ryan and Oscar. In Ryan's decision to stay at McLaren, I'm sure that it was something that was made pretty quickly. I think he was happy with the car, and is familiar with it. Having a whole season in this game already is a smart decision, because he's familiar with it. He knows what to do for next season, so he's probably put himself in a better position than, say, someone like myself, who has to sort of learn a new car.
Yeah, well, I think Oscar Grant is in that same scenario, going from a Ferrari engine to a Renault engine. Do you think Oscar's going to be able to extract the same level of results out of the new chassis?
It'll be interesting. I think only the first couple of rounds will tell whether or not he's adapted to it quickly. I think it'll have to be quickly, because as the point structure goes, points can quickly get out of hand if you're not on it. So he'd want to make sure, and I'm sure he's doing the practice to make sure that he's on the pace when it comes around to Australia.
Yeah. Well, moving on to Toro Rosso, myself, Dylan Anderson, have elected to re-sign with Toro Rosso. A lot of that is fueled by, one, my podium in Abu Dhabi. I think that was really good, and I'd like to continue that partnership with the team. But also, too, the same reason that you've gone off to Renault, and I believe Ryan's remained at McLaren. And myself at Toro Rosso, be joined by Shannon Mortlock. We're looking to have a constructors battle like we've never seen before in F1OWC, as all of the previous 11 constructor winning teams have all been either Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes or Williams, with the one-off constructor in Season 3. I think the way that the driver lineups are set for Season 12, that we're pretty much guaranteed to have a team win the constructors for the first time. And for me, remaining at Toro Rosso and teaming up with Shannon Mortlock, I think we've put ourselves in a good position to contest with yourself and Kurt and Ryan and Oscar to go for that that status of being the first team to bring a constructor to a team outside of the top four.
It's I think it's a smart decision by both of you. I think particularly in your situation, I think you proved, especially on the last race in Abu Dhabi, that you can score big points, and that was something that maybe also influenced Shanna's decision to continue the partnership that you had prior, before you ended up back at Toro Rosso. And like you said, it'll be a very contested Constructors' Championship, nothing like we have seen the past few seasons. It'll be, small points will make the difference, I think. And consistency is king. So.
Yeah. looking at the sister team there, Red Bull, Harry Ryan from Racing Point signs with Red Bull Racing. I think that's a really, really sort of juicy move. I reckon Harry can do really good things at Red Bull. What are your thoughts on him going to Red Bull, but teaming up with McLaren's Trent Fuller?
Well, I think in terms of Harry's personal results in the short time he's been here, he showed that he can score good points, and I'm sure he'll continue that into next season, being in a Red Bull, like I have been in the past and you have as well. It's particularly it's a good car to drive. Over the past few seasons, or over the season that I happen to be in the team.
Yep.
Teaming up with Trent Fuller is not won't be the easiest in terms of battling for constructors, but I'm sure that Trent will be looking to pick up points where he can.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where this leads Harry, especially at the midpoint of the season, reflecting on this decision that he made to go to Red Bull and make that move from Racing Point. I see where he sits in the drivers' championship as well. So
yeah, I definitely think he'll be one to watch and to take that challenge to those top group of drivers. I think I wish him all of the best, and Trent Fuller for his move to Red Bull for the first time. Obviously, he was there in Season 1 where Red Bull endured a lot of dominance, so it's good to finally see him in the blue suit. Now moving to your old team, Scuderia Ferrari. Interesting lineup there. Fletcher Sermon and Steve Shadlow have moved from Mercedes. It was kind of prophesized that they'd be departing and not being teammates in Season 12. What do you make of them staying on as teammates but taking up home in your old team?
Oh, for me, it came as a great surprise to me that they happened to fill my shoes at Ferrari. So, going through the draft and sitting there listening to the choices being made, and when it got to Fletcher, making the big move to Ferrari, it's big shoes to fill. It comes with a lot of history. So, particularly over the past 2 seasons, it's something that he'll have to think about when he focuses on his practice for the upcoming season to put in more solid results. I think consistency. He showed that he can pick up points where it matters. He's had a few good races in itself.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, the expectation of joining some of the more successful teams. Obviously, Ferrari being on the back of winning the constructors and 2 championships is, as you said, big shoes to fill. But looking at the draft that happened last night, if we'd spoken prior, would you think that the drivers sitting 12th and 13th on the draft would occupy Scuderia Ferrari?
Oh, no way. I didn't believe that it would go down to Ferrari having no seats filled up until that point. Part of me felt that maybe there was going to be a move by one of the top drivers to go to Ferrari. Obviously, they've decided to stick with, having a solid partnership instead of having maybe the team that they desired.
Because there was rumours floated around that Oscar Grant wanted to go to the Ferrari.
Yeah, there definitely was, and I believe in a way that Shannon Mortlock also, has a desire to want to race for Ferrari as well. But he's decided against that to have a solid teammate in yourself and battle for constructors in that way. So,
well, I think it was all about who was going to jump first, because I think if Shannon or one of those other guys further up the list did go to Ferrari, I think someone else would have jumped on there straight away. But judging by the allocation in the draft, it seemed that everyone was kind of sticking to the sort of unexpected option, which, as you said, left Ferrari without a driver. until the the 12th and 13th driver pick.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I think Trent was a little bit unhappy that he just missed out on a Ferrari seat. As he's verbally expressed that he loves racing for Ferrari as well. So
Yeah, well, that's right. He debuted in season 1 with Ferrari. He did season 1, 2, 3, and 4 for Ferrari, and he held the record and the stat for the most seasons with one single team. And the only reason that he was to depart from Ferrari was due to some regulation changes that come ahead of season 5. Which is unfortunate, but it would have been good to see Trent Fuller back in the red suit at Ferrari. But obviously, he's going to have to settle for another team, which is obviously Red Bull. Moving on to Haas, after losing Austin Smedley, Mitchell Hayward has moved from Alfa Romeo, who will line up alongside Ben Matchett, who has made the move from Williams, having only done one round at Abu Dhabi. What do you make of the Mitchell Hayward and Ben Matchett lineup at Haas?
I think it's an unlikely partnership. I think it was maybe something that, as these selections went on, it was more a matter of whether the choice was to have a teammate or pick a car that maybe you liked a bit more. But they've both decided to have a teammate, or in a sense, Ben's decided to, put himself in a team that, has another driver in which, he's in a better position to compete for constructors. As both drivers have debuted this season, so Mitchell having a bit more track time than Ben. We haven't seen too much from Ben as of yet, but it'll be interesting to see.
What do you make of his performance in Abu Dhabi, Ben?
I think there was a few blips here and there in terms of getting used to racing with the rest of the field. As you and I discussed in private, it takes a lot to get used to racing with each driver and understanding how each driver races in a race. Some are aggressive, some are not so much.
Yeah,
and
to learn who you're racing with.
Yeah, to learn who you're racing with and getting familiar with how you can approach each driver as you're coming up to them, or if you are quicker than them, how can you get past them. I think it'll take a bit more time, maybe some teething to get into the sort of mode of getting familiar with all the rest of the drivers. There was a little incident that resulted in my DNF that it involved Ben as well. It was something that was looked at after the race, but it was something that will take a bit of time. In terms of Mitchell, I think he has slowly built his pace up over the season. He's certainly quicker than he was when he first started.
Yeah, and he did make that change to alter his driving angle.
Yeah, which was a decision that was made in Brazil, if I'm correct.
Yep.
So that'll take some time to get used to, but once he does, I think it'll benefit him in the long run.
All right, moving on to Williams, which is the last team on our lineup. We have Austin Smedley, who's moved, as I said, from Haas, and Mitchell Collin, who's moved from Toro Rosso back to Williams, where he debuted back in Season 2, marking the 10th season anniversary since his debut, and obviously he won the Constructors and Drivers' Championship in Season 3, so I think it'd be good to see Mitchell go back to Williams. What's your take on that?
I think it's great, paying homage to your previous team. I think it's a good feeling around it. He's familiar with the team in itself, so I'm sure he's having some good vibes heading into next season, knowing that he's won a championship with that team in the past, and he has a solid teammate in Austin as well. So I think that if they work together, it'll help build themselves and help help them become more competitive. So
Yeah, I think it
yeah,
should be really good. Uh, some absentees from the grid in season 12. We'll see us say goodbye to Alfa Romeo, with Oscar and Mitchell Hayward leaving that team. Obviously, they've had a really successful season in terms of race wins and podiums, etc. With Oscar. Racing Point, 2 podiums in season 11. They're going to be without a driver lineup for season 12. But I think the big absence would have to be Mercedes-AMG Petronas, 5-time constructor winner of the F1OWC, their last Constructors' Championship comeback in Season 8. How do you view Mercedes absent from the lineup in Season 12?
oh, it'd definitely be a strange feeling, particularly when I started in this in the F1OWC. Mercedes was the dominant team and had been for some time. So to think that they're not going to be on the grid this season kind of feels a little bit empty because they're a car that arguably has the most success.
Yep.
Over the
I've
course.
won 2 drivers' championships and 2 constructors with them. You've won with them. Brian Cruz has won with them. Peter Dongo's won with them.
Yeah, it's definitely a team that is, like I said, has brought a lot of success, and it will feel strange in the beginning to not have them on the grid, but I think that'll quickly be forgotten when we think about all the other competitors we have. So
Yeah, that's right. I had a conversation with Shannon Mortlock earlier in the week, and he said he's curious to know when the F1OWC is expected to get their next X Factor driver to come in, raise the bar, and dominate. Obviously, you and Brian Cruz have been at the top of the series for some time now, with the exceptions of Nathan Mazzolo coming in and doing what he did for Sauber. Obviously, we've got Ryan Lowe in the McLaren now, which is on the limit to matching your pace and potentially win championships. Do you think that next X Factor driver is going to come within our current lineup, or should we expect someone else to come in, potentially jump into Mercedes and bring them back to championship glory?
I believe before even looking outside this league, I think looking within it, I think we definitely have drivers that are capable of bringing that, like you say, X factor to each race weekend. I think it was just a matter of consistency for some of the drivers. Like I believe there's a good handful of drivers that can do that. Like I said, consistency is the main point when it comes to wanting to hold a lead or gain big points over the course of the season, and trying to get in front of others. But yeah, the pace I've seen this season, there is a lot of drivers that are there's a good handful that are capable of bringing that to a race weekend. I think we've seen on a few occasions that there has been race weekends where a certain driver has shined above others.
Yeah.
In a sense, and I'm excited to see that because the challenge is definitely exciting on my behalf to see that sort of happen, and the change to begin to sort of continue and evolve as each race weekend goes by. I definitely see the likes of Ryan, Shannon and Oscar, even Kurt bringing this extra sort of motivation to want to win. It'll just it does take a lot of practice, but I'm sure they're already putting that in. So
Yeah, well, that's right. We look at the season 11 championship, and 10 out of the 19 drivers finished on the podium in season 11. So I think that itself says that that there's room for good races and a lot of success for a lot of people within the series. Now we'll just run through the podium count. Myself and Ryan Lowe obviously finished by 1 point in the championship at the end of Abu Dhabi, but you both had 27 podium finishes each. And then we've got Luke on 16 podiums, Oscar on 13 podiums, Shannon on 14 podiums, Brian on 15 podiums, Austin on 4, and then me, Harry, and Arthur on 1 podium each. Do you think we will see the level of dominance from, say, yourself and Ryan, or for a pair of drivers going into the regulations next season, knowing that there will be a format change? Or will we see more mixed up results?
It's hard, I think, especially in this era, it's hard to see, one driver truly dominate the rest of the pack. I think it'll, like this season has showed, it brings a lot of mixed results, and it brings a lot of different variables into a race weekend, especially when you walk away with maybe half the points you may have expected. I don't believe that someone will truly dominate, but someone could come out and surprise me. So I really, really unsure as to whether or where everyone will be at, especially when it comes to Melbourne.
Yeah, that's right. And speaking of Melbourne, new regulation change. So we are looking to fast track the series. Obviously, the original plan was to wrap up season 11, wait 2-3 months until F1 2020 come round. We haven't ran 2 seasons on one game for a while, since season 7 and 8. We're looking to fast track this. It means we've got to change our regulation as it currently stands. So we are looking to go to a single day event and have a 30-minute practice with a 20-minute qualifying, which we saw in season 11. 25% sprint race, and usually on the Thursday we'd have a 50% reverse grid feature race. Now, obviously, we're trying to fast track the series or season as fast as we can. So we're going to have the sprint race on the Wednesday, and then we're going to have a reverse grid sprint race straight after it, also on the Wednesday. Now, initially drafted down, that reverse grid was still going to be double points. The idea was floated around with a few people, and Oscar and Austin and Shannon said, hey, look, the reverse grid race being double points and being half the distance didn't really seem justified. So the draft potentially is for it to be just a standard reverse grid race at 25% with no double points. What's your take on the draft of the regulations?
Yeah, I think there's definitely valid concerns raised in terms of, especially the reverse grid race being only half the distance. I think it's something that, definitely is, like we've said, we are, looking to keep it, the same points, so it won't be double points for both for the feature race in itself. It will still, bring mixed results. But it won't, if there's no double points, it won't punish drivers as much who do not have the best race, especially in the feature race. So we could see a situation of drivers more focusing on the first initial sprint race and gaining an advantage in qualifying and trying to do their best to win the first race. So, it essentially makes it easier for them in the second race because they've already banked some solid points. But yeah, I'm really excited to see this, but particularly in such a short, space of time, when the last season went for effectively 10 months.
Yeah.
This season will, go across the span of only, was it 5 weeks?
Yeah, 5 to 6 weeks.
5 to 6 weeks. So, we're looking at a situation where, every race you're going to have to bring your A game. You don't have time, to
practice and really
to practice.
Yeah,
you won't have that. You won't have that time between races to focus on a certain track and iron out some of the little inconsistencies you may have with it. You're just really going to have to.
Even going from the sprint race to the reverse grid race, like it's back to back, there'll be a small intermission, but usually you do your sprint race and you've got 24 hours to kind of pull it together and practice a heavy run or race run and do all that simulation. But now you're going to be straight into a reverse grid race. I think it's going to create some very mixed results with some of the guys coming through the back of the pack in the reverse grid race.
Oh, for sure, and especially it being half, only a 25% race. I think we're going to see a lot more bold moves being made.
Yeah.
A lot more aggressive driving, and people taking a few more risks to get higher up the grid, to secure those better points. And like I've said before, risk, also
reward
carries, versus reward. Take the risk, but if it doesn't pay off, it can really cost you. So it'll be very interesting to see. It's definitely going to change the way that I approach each round. Because you have so much more to practice.
Well, your
in
strength
such a short space of time.
Your strength has been consistency over the longer feature race, but now you're going to have to adapt your driving style, as you said, to combat the shorter format.
Yeah, that's right, and it's something that I'll have to practice to keep, to make sure that I'm keeping up with the rest of them. So, very interesting. It's going to bring a lot of mixed results, like you said. Do
you want to see more wet weather races in season 12, or are you content with the dry?
I think some drivers, particularly like the wet. Me personally, I'm more of a, I probably thrive a bit more in the dry. But having a more dynamic weather, will bring a different variable. The unknown. You won't know, and you won't know what you're coming up with until you actually enter the lobby. What the weather's going to be like. Even qualifying or the race itself.
I think we ran dynamic in the earlier parts of the F1OWC season 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Where it was dynamic, and we had all kinds of mixed results there. But then we sort of transitioned into having fixed sort of real world weather based on what the weather was in the real F1 race of that particular season, and that's when we were running single rounds or single seasons on each game. I think going back to that dynamic or having fixed weather formats, whether they're wet, dry, maybe we could draw them at a lottery or whatever, because ultimately if you do have a wet race, you'd want to know if it's going to be wet. Like the real F1 teams, they've got forecasts, they've got radars. If rain is coming, it's coming. You're not going straight into a race and walking out of your garage and going, oh, it's wet, we're all on slicks. So maybe there might be a wiggle room there for us to, maybe we'll do a draft, like a draft for the weather for each race, and then we could put them in there, do 2 picks, and go, okay, it goes from dry to wet, wet to dry, and we'll let that. Maybe we could do a live draft for the weather.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. It'd be good to see, some of the other drivers, what their take on it is. Everyone has their own opinion. Some like it dynamic, others don't so much. Others like to know what they're expecting, and I've seen drivers who are just really adapt really well to each weather. Each different set of weather that they come up against.
Well, we saw that in Hockenheim with Oscar and Shannon Mortlock.
Yeah, that's right. And if you can't adapt quick enough, you essentially could be left behind. So
yeah,
it's an interesting one.
Alright guys, that's going to wrap things up for tonight's podcast. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in, and hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you again on Tuesday ahead of the season opener in Australia. So I'd like to thank Brandon Tanti for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
And we'll see you there.